Chapter 3. My eyes felt glued together, but I didn't try to go back to sleep. No, something had woken me. The kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee and milk. My arms wrapped around him, my face pressed against his. "Father!" He laughed, setting down his steaming mug to hug me. "How'd it go, Big?" "Fine, But I caught sight of Mother's face and sat down at the table for my tea and toast. Cammy appeared in the doorway and flung herself at Father like I had, but she stayed in his lap, even though she was 8 years old, and Mother, smiling, brought over Cammy's plate and mug and set them at Father's place. Ty showed up at last and asked, "Why am I sleeping in my coat?" And, despite everything, the rest of us laughed. But as we got ready to head out the door to school, Father drew me aside. "Take Cammy down Heldig Street. Don't go any farther east than that." "Why?" "Some of the streets got hit. I don't want her to see it. Just head west, not east." "Okay. Promise now?" I nodded. Dust or ashes lined Father's clothes. His eyes looked puffy and tired. How had his night been? What had he seen? What had he done? I pressed into him in a big, tight hug, getting a whiff of that odor from the bombing, then searching out the smell that I knew. The post office where he worked during the day, paper and sealing glue and cedar sorting boxes. I found it, breathed in deeply, and relaxed. "Be good, Big. Don't forget which way to go." "I won't." Cammy's wooden soles slapped the frozen gray cobblestones as she hurried up the street ahead of me, though she turned around to look back every minute or so. Her bare knees between her skirt and her knee socks grew red and then white in the cold. Her braids swung loose from her scarf. I was curious about what had happened east of Heldig Street, but I wouldn't break my promise to Father, though he'd only said not to take Cammy there. He hadn't said anything about not going there on my own later. "Mathilde!" Meg's caught up with me. I was worried that they'd cancel school. Mother and Father seemed to think we were still having it. "I hope we are. I hope the school wasn't hit." We continued up the street in silence for a few more minutes, past a closed bakery, and one that was still open, though the window was half empty, past a cobbler who had doubled the size of the sign that said repairs, past a butcher, meat today while it lasts, past the bookshop that hadn't been repainted in years, the books themselves crumbling and yellow. A lot of people were out, but they didn't look like they were on their way to work. Some wore blankets around their shoulders instead of coats. They leaned against houses or on steps, holding steaming tin mugs. They all looked lost. Was that man's hair singed off? There were children too. Why didn't I recognize them? They were from my neighborhood, but their eyes were big and scared, their faces smudged with gray dirt. Cammy, several yards ahead of me, started skipping, not noticing these things. We passed a poster, "Take the Adolescent Army Aptitude Test." "Megs, what do you think they'll have the children do?" "They'll probably find places for them to stay." "No, not these children, the ones who take the test." "Oh, on the test or after?" "After. I don't know." Aerials buzzed low overhead. We looked up to see our own blue-green crest markings on them. A whole fleet of aerials heading east to our borders, or perhaps beyond them, into the expanding lands of Tissia. We had been at war for a year already, though our borders had held, but with Tissia joined with Arrowburn, we had to defend thousands more miles. Soon, the only safe place in Soferend would be up north, along the Kerdal Sea. Tissia and Arrowburn didn't have access to the sea. We walked in silence for a few more minutes, and then she said, "They wouldn't send children to the front lines. They wouldn't. Nobody would bomb children in their beds either. At least I used to think nobody would." Megs kept her eyes straight ahead, her mouth set tight. And "I love you" for her caught in my throat. To say sorry, that I hadn't meant anything, that I didn't want anything to happen to her. She turned and squeezed my hand, looking much more like her normal self. "Don't," she said before I could speak. "I already know."